Well, essentially, the lecture is aimed at being a 30-minute counterbalance to the narrative that boys get throughout their 5 years at Eton. And to help you understand what that orthodox narrative is, the one I was challenging, it's worth bearing in mind that the boys are given half-day training sessions by an external organization called the Good Lad Initiative. And that has been described by one of its former members as encouraging boys to see themselves through a prism of toxic masculinity and dysfunction. Now, I don't think it is fair or responsible to encourage boys to see themselves in this way exclusively. I think it's fair for them to consider the arguments regarding toxic masculinity, but they should also be given counter arguments. So the aim was to provide a counterweight to what they are normally taught on this topic.
Boys at Eton are taught that masculinity is toxic.
Yes, and that seems to me to lack balance. So I was addressing that. And my personal view is that I am a gender feminist or an equity feminist. So I believe the sexes are of equal moral worth and dignity. But that doesn't mean that I believe that all differences between them are purely socially constructed. I think they are based in biological reality. So to say that masculinity is purely something that is socially constructed and is a way in which all men oppress all women, and we can completely reimagine it, seems to me to be worth questioning, to put it mildly.
Okay, I've seen your lecture on YouTube. It's still there. In fact, so have 173,000 other people, judging by the ticker count. It comes across to me as a defense of a patriarchal society, a society physically dominated by men, where women will always be weak because of their slighter biological build. So, to be clear, are those your personal views or just views you were expressing?
The main point of the lecture is it's about 40 different academic references that boys don't normally encounter in their 5 years at Eton because they run counter to the ideas normally presented with. So it's interesting that some of the parents and boys have themselves picked up on this one-sidedness that I was aiming to address. One mother wrote a piece in The Critic complaining that her boy felt that the school's PSHE curriculum had become a vehicle for radical feminist ideology and that opinions were being presented as fact. Now, I think that boys should be able to debate and explore critically the full range of facts and research, not just one side.
But to be clear, do you share those views that society should be patriarchal and men should have the upper hand because they're physically stronger?
I don't think the lecture argues that men have the upper hand. Rather, it suggests that there are biological reasons for the traditional division of labor, and men's greater physical strength has been put in the service of providing for women and children and protecting them. So in the sense that those roles are based in biological reality, yes, that is my view.
Your lecture was to provoke. It may not be all your views. You may share some of them. I understand that. But even if they're not all your views, I don't think you disagree that lecture does contain some pretty strong meat, and some pretty strong meat that some people might find offensive. Some people might think cross the line of decency, especially if it's been put in front of us. That was the intention of 15, 16-year-old impressionable boys. Some examples, for example, the lecture argues that women want to be overwhelmed by the sheer power of masculinity. You say human women prefer the smell of dominant males, more masculine male faces, and men behaving more dominantly when at peak fertility than at other times during their menstrual cycle. I quote you. And this is because ovulation makes women desire a strong protector. Could you see how that could offend some?
Well, if one finds that offensive, the really interesting question is, given that that is the result of a large meta study and that there's scientific research backing that quotation you just read out, why, purely because one person finds it offensive, should it not be game for discussion and debate? This is an important idea. Do we limit the range of ideas that we can study in educational institutions based on one person's line being crossed into the realm of offensiveness? If we start down that road, where do we stop?
Well, I think that's a really important debate, and that's what we're exploring now. I mean, another example in the video, you talk about male rape in prison and how male rape outstrips female rape or man on woman rape in normal society. Now, some people dispute those figures, but even if those figures are right, does just simply saying them in such a provocative fashion risk belittling men raping women?
I don't think there's a sense in which merely citing figures showing that male on male rape in prison is greater than male on female rape outside prison belittles male on female rape. It doesn't belittle rape at all. If anything, it calls greater attention to the problem that rape is. Whether it's male on male or male on female, it's horrific. And one could even argue that we don't talk about male on male rape in prison enough. And that's the real danger.
Another example that I think some people have picked up on is in your lecture, you play some clips, and one clip in particular from a film of Goodfellas, of a mafiosi crossing the street to smash the face in of effectively a love rival with the butt of his pistol. And the point about this scene is that the woman rather enjoys this, and she was turned on by what he did. I mean, simply by playing that clip, but it has an 18 rating, after all. Goodfellas is a pretty explicit film. That glorifies violence, and it suggests to these kids, potentially, that smashing someone's face in is how you attract women.
Well, to glorify violence would be to admire it without justification. And the point of that clip is a very visceral illustration of the way in which, as many scientists argue, some of the traits that we now call toxically masculine, like aggression, for example, stoicism, dominance, have actually been valued by women for the role that they can play in serving women's interests. And I don't think it's too controversial to say that women would still prefer men to protect them. Tom, if you had a breakdown in your car in the middle of the night, would you be keen on sending your wife out into the darkness to search for help while you sat inside safely locked?
That I completely accept is a view you can hold. I think you might also accept it causes some offense, but I think your argument is that is the price for freedom of speech, which that is your right. There are those also who might say that you, by the end of this process with your dispute with the headmaster, Simon Henderson, you knew there was a good chance that you would be dismissed if you didn't take this lecture down off YouTube. Do you really think it was worth throwing your job away over an argument that you and I both admit is pretty controversial?
Controversy, as you just hinted, is essential to any kind of genuine education. It's the clash of ideas that education really depends upon and actually thrives in. It's something that, if you take away, leaves education fundamentally lacking in the most important respect. So for me, it wasn't so much the video itself or anything about its content. It was the point of principle. And this is a big point of principle. And this is why I've had so much support in terms of crowdfunding for my legal case, and also from the broader Eton community, parents, boys, old Etonians. What's fascinating in this case is that it was a worldwide first in its attempt to use the Equality Act initially to stifle the range of ideas that boys can debate. The argument was that although the Equality Act excludes curriculum content, even 18 films, it excludes curriculum content, that exclusion only applies to students, not to staff. So one member of staff, and initially it was just one, complaining that the lecture could cause a hostile work environment and therefore constitute harassment, merely if that member of staff was expected to allow boys to discuss it critically, was enough to shut the whole thing down. And I didn't feel comfortable allowing the spearheading of the Equality Act to suppress curriculum content, because that could lead in principle to a teacher saying that allowing boys to discuss Othello, for example, or To Kill a Mockingbird, or Mein Kampf might create a hostile environment. And therefore, those books have to be off the curriculum too.
Where are the limits of freedom of speech versus offending people? I mean, you could argue, taking your argument to the nth degree, that it is your freedom to be racist, your freedom to be homophobic, if those are your beliefs, though they are very offensive to the rest of society.
This is well established under Article 10. We have the freedom to offend, to shock or disturb. And what you just mentioned would come under hate speech. Now, there's nothing in the lecture that comes remotely close to hate speech, but you can offend, shock or disturb without veering into hate speech. And in fact, Article 10 covers our right to receive information as well. So this instruction to stop boys even watching the video in their free time after it was cancelled at Eton infringed not only on my rights to express, but their rights to receive information.
And you think this is endemic across Eton, do you? This wasn't just your own isolated experience with the headmaster?
Other masters have commented on the idea that there is a narrowing of debate, and I've been told that after the lecture was cancelled, the boys had to set up their own discussion group to watch it. They watched it on YouTube, then sat around for about an hour afterwards discussing the ideas, in my opinion, as they should have been able to do in class. And we can see elsewhere in the wider culture and education that this is a problem. We've got, for example, thinking elsewhere of the recent organization set up to address precisely this problem. Counterweight, for example, describes itself as pushing back at the ideology of critical social justice. We've got the free speech champions recently established who want to argue there's no forbidden topics. And also the Heterodox Academy, which promotes open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement. So this is a broader trend in the culture at large.
Your experience, though, just to finish what happened with you at the school, you appealed your dismissal. That was heard in December in an internal hearing, and your appeal was dismissed and your firing was complete. But that's, I understand, not the end of the story. You're now decided to pursue Eton legally.
Yes, so the employment tribunal claim will centre on the way in which we argue I have been directly discriminated against as a result of my philosophical belief in the essence of a liberal education being fundamentally about balance and fearless discussion of ideas. And I think this also is about the heart of what an Eton education is, especially. Eton's aims and ethos, right at the top, mention independent critical thought and broad-based discussion. And like many people, I feel that those are the things particularly under threat.
So your claim for the employment tribunal is one of discrimination, not wrongful dismissal.
Discrimination on the basis of philosophical belief, that's right.
I understand also that friends said that the college's headmaster libelled you. He made some slightly dark insinuations there was something else to your dismissal, not just a row about this lecture. Is that something you're looking at redress for in the courts?
So this was mentioned by some colleagues and some boys who were told by the headmaster that the real reason for my dismissal wasn't the video, and the video wasn't actually the real problem. And in fact, there was something beyond my asking for a reason why the video had to come down. So this something else rumor was, in my opinion, particularly damaging in the context of the most recent suspended master, whose suspension wasn't commented on, being Matthew Mowbray, who's recently been sentenced for sex crimes involving children. To insinuate there might be something else beyond the video in that context, I felt was particularly damaging, yes.
And you want to pursue that in court?
Well, I can't comment on exactly what is happening with that, but we are taking it seriously.
I mean, it does sound like you're engaging a fairly large amount of hefty legal action. This is not going to help Eton's reputation one bit. You're obviously proud. You taught there for 9 years. Taking it through the courts, no matter whether you're right or wrong, is going to do substantial damage to the school. Is that something you really want to do?
Well, I think the main thing that has damaged the college's reputation is actually the dismissal and the refusal to stand up for the college's own aims and ethos by having this debate. And actually, even though I didn't need to, I requested for somebody to give a counter argument while I was delivering the lecture, because I think that would really show the college making a stand against this encroaching cancel culture. And I've had many messages of support from teachers in the UK and also abroad, saying they feel that Eton has let down not only itself, but British education, which it is seen as being a symbol of and also a bastion of.
Is Simon Henderson, the headmaster you've had this such strong running with, is he the right person to be in charge at Eton?
Well, I've always got on well with Simon Henderson up until this point. And even now, I don't see it as a personal dispute between the two of us. I see it rather as, should Eton give a craven response to a cancel culture that threatens it, in the mistaken, I believe, hope that appeasement is somehow going to make them leave Eton alone, or should it stand up for itself? And I think greater courage is needed, and the institution has lost its nerve.
And you think you've got the support of most of the boys, do you, and quite a few parents and old Etonians too? What's your evidence of that?
The boys themselves wrote an open letter to the school's management, which ended up getting nearly 3,000 signatures, arguing that they felt I'd been the victim of institutional bullying. And they also very elegantly put some arguments in favor of the importance of debate to education. And they said that the school's test of whether or not ideas were acceptable or not, being if one person finds that it creates a hostile environment, was too restrictive, and that it threatened the soul of Eton in their view. After the college initially backed down on trying to weaponize the Equality Act to suppress curriculum content, because that had never been done anywhere in the world, they fell back on their own internal equality policy. So it's Eton's own internal policy that is being used to stifle debate here, not the external Equality Act.
Do you agree with that? Do you think the soul of the college is under threat? It's strong language.
Well, if you look at the importance of debate to Eton's history and think about the fact that every boarding house has a room called debate in it, and we've got old Etonians like George Orwell saying that if liberty means anything at all, it means the liberty to tell people what they do not want to hear, then I think you can see why so many people in the Eton community feel very strongly about this. And this is connected not only to education at Eton, but to fundamental British values like tolerance, like liberty. I don't think cancelling debate is a good example of tolerating beliefs that you disagree with.
You've got some support from MPs, some peers, former pupils at the school. Anyone in government yet?
I'd rather not mention any names, but yes, there are plenty of supporters.
In the government, ministers have supported you, told you they supported you,
When the story first broke, yes, there were lots of emails coming through.
From ministers in the government?
Yes.
Anyone in the cabinet?
I'd rather not comment, but there are plenty of people who feel very strongly about this and see it having ramifications far beyond Eton.
Why do you think your case has been picked up as a cause célèbre? Moving away from Eton for a moment, you have got a lot of attention for this. People are talking about it. Some people feel very strongly about it both ways. Why is that?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think that the need that many people have perceived to set up organizations and charities to defend free speech in academic settings in particular shows that there's a real sense it's under threat. Now, why do some people push in a way that does seem to threaten it? I would suggest this is because there's a growing loss of belief in rationality itself, in engaging with the other side in good faith. And I think this stems from some ideas that everything is ultimately just about power, or narratives that seek to gain political power, and that free speech is no longer valuable because it's a way of aiming at truth. That itself has been called into question.
And do you see parallels with other people in society who've entered into the very hotly disputed topics of gender politics, whether they like to or not? J.K. Rowling, for example, a very different argument, but she took a lot of abuse, for example, by discussing the physiological makeup of women, what it means to be called a woman. Do you see parallels to J.K. Rowling himself?
I think the J.K. Rowling dispute is, again, to do with offence. So the idea that you can't fundamentally change your biological sex purely by identifying as someone of the opposite gender. So that was the row, really, that she got involved in. And we can also see that in Maya Forstatter's case as well. So saying that a trans woman isn't a biological woman, then I think that's an interesting point too. Very similar argument.
Will, some people have called you a martyr for free speech. Is that something you're comfortable with?
I don't see myself as a martyr, and that's not what I set out to be either. What's really going on is that I've got a strong belief in the principle at stake here. And when I set out initially to try to understand why the headmaster wanted this video deleted, wanted a reason so I could understand exactly what invisible tripwire I had crossed, I initially didn't really think it would end in my dismissal. But after it escalated and it became apparent I was going to be investigated whether or not the video was taken down, it became clear to me that it probably would. But it was something that I was willing to lose my job over, because without free speech, I don't think I have a serious job in education.
Do you want your job back at Eton?
I think that Many people in the Eton community would like me to be reinstated because it would reassure their confidence in Eton's confidence in this point of principle. I think they feel that the dismissal has brought the college into disrepute, not the video.
Well, that's them. But what do you think? I mean, all the trouble you've put the college through, the college have put you through. Do you want your job back?
I don't think the bridges have been completely burnt, and I love my job and I would do it for free. And the reason I felt so strongly about this is I felt that my job was being taken away from me before I was even sacked. So if it was offered back to me again and the full range of ideas were allowed to be discussed, then yes.
Will Knowland, a former English teacher at Eton College, thank you for joining us on G&T this morning.